75 men have served as Treasury Secretary of the United States. Few have had the impact of Henry Paulson Jr.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you got a lot of sleep last night.
Tonight, another wild ride on Wall Street.
Stock prices plunge again.
All eyes are on AIG.
It's now 8 straight losses.
In 2008, as the global economy teetered on a precipice, he became the face of the financial crisis.
We must now take further decisive action. People can remain confident in the soundness and the resilience of our financial system. The turmoil will not end quickly, and significant challenges remain ahead.
Witness for today's hearing is
he was still answering for his decisions at a hearing on Capitol Hill last week.
We worked hard for these tax dollars, and now these guys who screwed up everything are getting bonuses.
How did you feel about walking out of this place finally?
Paulson left the Treasury last January.
I was in some ways ready to go.
After a turbulent 2.5-year tenure.
We did things that were unpopular at the time, are even more unpopular today as the public has gotten angry.
In his first television interview since stepping down, he acknowledged history is judging him harshly.
And you think that anger is justified?
I tell you, I understand that anger.
The crisis tested Paulson, a prince of Wall Street and ardent defender of free markets.
As we develop plans to purchase equity,
he became perhaps the biggest government interventionist of modern times. King Henry became the bailout king.
Did you find yourself sort of wrestling with your economic and political philosophy?
I didn't have to wrestle. I didn't think a lot about theory. I just understood how bad it could be. And so I just felt like I was racing against time with inadequate tools and authorities to try to stave off disaster.
Critics have accused him of lurching from crisis to crisis. Paulson has spent the past year answering them, writing a book he calls On the Brink.
I believe that if the system collapsed, we easily could have seen unemployment of 25%. And so that reality was staring me in the face, and it was an awful reality.
How close, in your view, did we come to that?
Oh, I think we came very, very close.
The men and women of this department will have an outstanding leader in Hank Paulson.
When President Bush tapped the Goldman Sachs CEO to be Treasury Secretary, he chose a straight-talking deal-maker who's never liked playing defense. An all-Ivy tackle for Dartmouth in the 1960s, Hammering Hank was known for his aggressive play.
Who first gave you the nickname the Hammer?
I don't remember.
But it stuck.
It stuck.
After college, Paulson landed a job in the Pentagon and was assigned to help the failing Lockheed Corporation.
It's rather ironic. I got some early bailout experience.
He moved over to the Nixon White House for 1.5 years before rising up the ranks of the powerhouse Wall Street investment bank, Goldman Sachs. When he left the company to become Treasury Secretary, he sold his stock for nearly $500 million.
Everything on this side of the fence here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is preserved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Paulson and his wife Wendy, who are avid environmentalists, never embraced the flashy New York lifestyle.
I grew up on actually a farm not far from here through 6th grade.
Right.
And then we sold the farm and moved here.
So this is your family house?
Yeah.
His mother still lives in that house in Barrington, Illinois, outside Chicago. In the 70s, the Paulsons built a house next door on land they bought from his parents.
I gave him a note because we didn't have any money to buy it with. We paid it off over time.
They planned to move back here after he left Wall Street, but then the president called.
You probably figured it was a couple of quiet years in Washington.
It's never a couple of quiet years with me. But
Unwittingly, Paulson walked into an economic earthquake.
The Federal Reserve is taking emergency action.
First, the rescue of Bear Stearns.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are critical to turning the corner on housing.
Then the takeover of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. When he took the first steps toward the ultimate seizure of the mortgage giants on a July Sunday outside the Treasury,
I look forward to working closely
he thought he'd
with
contained the
congressional
crisis.
to enact this legislation as soon as possible. That was the time that I was perhaps the most hopeful. I remember going out on the steps, and we were racing to beat a thunderstorm. And so the skies darkened.
As it turned out, that's exactly what you were doing.
That's exactly right.
Within weeks, Lehman Brothers, the 157-year-old investment bank, was on the brink of collapse. Holed up on the 13th floor of the New York Federal Reserve with Timothy Geithner, Paulson worked the phones to find a buyer, but failed.
My stomach tightened up, and it was one of the times during the crisis where I was momentarily overcome with fear.
Paulson, a Christian Scientist, called home to his wife, Wendy.
And I said, everybody's going to be looking to me for answers, and I don't have any. Please help me, pray for me. Boy, that was a dark, dark hour.
This is going to be one of the watershed days in financial markets history.
It would get darker. When Lehman went under the next day, the stock market plunged more than 500 points. It didn't help that Paulson implied he'd been unwilling to save Lehman.
I never once considered that it was appropriate to put taxpayer money on the line in resolving Lehman Brothers.
You took a lot of heat for the outcome with Lehman. The French finance minister called it horrendous.
These critics look and say, well, look at Bear Stearns, look at AIG, why not Lehman? But the fact situation at Lehman was very different. That no human being could have worked any harder than I did for a long period of time to help Lehman Brothers.
Paulson insists that without a buyer, the government had no authority to help save Lehman. The crisis was wearing on the Treasury chief, and when Paulson grew exhausted, he was prone to an embarrassing condition: the dry heaves.
Were you concerned that if people saw you?
Oh, absolutely. I knew I was fine, but I thought it sure wouldn't look good for someone to see the Treasury Secretary double over with dry heaves, and I don't think anybody saw it. They heard it once.
How do you explain that?
I didn't explain. I just kept going.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth?
This past week, Paulson was asked to explain his role in the controversial AIG rescue. Billions pumped into the collapsing insurance giant were used to pay off banks in full, including Paulson's former company, Goldman Sachs, now run by Lloyd Blankfein.
Some have suggested that you had a special interest in protecting Goldman.
When I became Treasury Secretary, I sold my Goldman Sachs stock. I severed my relationship with Goldman Sachs. My responsibility was to the American people.
And you spoke with Lloyd Blankfein 24 times in 6 days. Why?
Well, first of all, I doubt I spoke with Lloyd Blankfein 24 times in 6 days.
The phone records say he did.
Hi, David, it's Hank.
But they also show he talked constantly with Wall Street executives, he says, to keep track of the markets. But many will remember him only as the man who bailed out the banks.
And I will tell you right now and tell the American people, they're not going to lose a dime on the money that we put in those banks.
History may prove him right. Most of the major banks have already paid back the TARP money with interest. They're also paying themselves billions in bonuses again.
If you were back running a bank today, would you be paying the kind of bonuses that are being paid on Wall Street?
I think some of these numbers seem ridiculously high.
1 year after he left the Treasury, Paulson says not enough has changed.
Is the patient still sick?
The patient is stable and recovering if the patient is the banking system. But if the patient is the regulatory system, that patient is still very sick. And the question is this.
But Hank Paulson is not the doctor anymore.
How do you believe the credit crisis?
He's now a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, teaching classes, and at 63, considering his next step.
You said, I think, that you didn't want to be Treasury Secretary just to have been Treasury Secretary.
That's for sure.
You wanted to have an impact.
Yes.
You did have an impact.
I did have an impact, although I would have settled for having had a much smaller impact.